The Louisiana Bayou was a world unto itself, a sprawling labyrinth of dark water, twisted mangroves, and cypress trees draped in Spanish moss that hung like ghostly curtains. The air was thick with the scent of mud and decay, punctuated by the drone of cicadas and the occasional splash of an alligator slipping into the inky depths. For Ethan Caldwell, this place was more than a wilderness. It was a graveyard of memories, holding the ghosts of his mother, Sarah, and his younger sister, Emma, who vanished 11 years ago during a boating trip in Bayou Black. The official report claimed they'd gotten lost in the swamp's maze, their small boat swallowed by the unforgiving waters. But Ethan never believed it. His mother, a woman who knew the bayou's channels like the back of her hand, wouldn't have simply vanished. And Emma, barely 5 years old, with her bright eyes and infectious laugh, couldn't have wandered off alone. There was something else, something darker, and Ethan had spent over a decade chasing it. Every night since their disappearance, Ethan lay awake, replaying the last moments he'd shared with them. Sarah packing the boat with supplies, Emma clutching her favorite stuffed alligator, giggling about the big adventure ahead. The police had searched for months, combing the waterways with boats and dogs, but found nothing. No boat, no bodies, just an abandoned campsite by the water's edge, its fire pit cold and untouched. The authorities eventually suggested Sarah might have chosen to leave, to escape her life for reasons unknown. Ethan's father, broken by grief, had accepted it, moving away to start over. But Ethan couldn't. Sarah was the heart of their family, a woman who taught him to fish in the bayou's shallows and read the stars above its murky waters. She wouldn't abandon them. And Emma, so full of life, deserved better than to be written off as lost. Now, 29, Ethan had spent his 20s consumed by the search. He'd dropped out of college, taken odd jobs as a mechanic to fund his trips into the bayou, and pored over maps and old police reports until his eyes burned. Each lead ended in a dead end, each trip into the swamp yielding nothing but frustration and mosquito bites. But he couldn't let go. There was a piece of the puzzle missing, a truth hidden in the bayou's depths. His latest hunch led him to a remote stretch of Bayou Black, a place so isolated even the local fishermen avoided it, whispering about strange lights and boats that moved in the night. It was a place no one had searched, a forgotten corner where the water ran deep and the mangroves grew thick. Ethan gripped the throttle of their small aluminum boat, the engine's low hum blending with the bayou's eerie symphony. Beside him, his best friend, Lucas Hayes, sat at the bow, adjusting his cap against the humid haze that clung to their skin. Lucas had been with Ethan through every failed search, from diving into muddy channels to interviewing old trappers who claimed to know the swamp secrets. He was the only one who hadn't given up on Ethan, even when the obsession strained their friendship. Lucas's easygoing nature, his love for the bayou's wild beauty, and his knack for cracking jokes in the face of despair, kept Ethan grounded, but it couldn't erase the ache in his chest. The boat glided through a narrow channel, the water black and still, reflecting the gnarled branches overhead. Ethan's eyes scanned the surroundings, alert for any sign, a glint of metal, a disturbance in the reeds. Lucas fiddled with an echo sounder, its screen casting a faint green glow in the dim light. "Man, you're on a mission today," Lucas said, swatting at a mosquito and taking a swig from his water bottle. "What do you think you're going to find out here? Some old pirate treasure? A sunken barge from the 1800s? His tone was light, but Ethan could hear the concern beneath it. "I'm looking for answers, Lucas," Ethan said, his voice steady but heavy. "Not treasure." He kept his eyes on the echo sounder, watching for anomalies in the murky depths. Lucas paused, his usual grin fading. He knew the weight of Ethan's search, had seen it etch lines into his friend's face over the years. Sarah and Emma's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mystery that had consumed Ethan's life. The police had called it a closed case, but Ethan saw it in every ripple of the bayou, every shadow in the mangroves. "I know it's been hell, man," Lucas said after a moment, his voice softer. "But the cops did everything they could. Maybe it's time to—" "Don't." Ethan cut him off, his grip tightening on the throttle. I can't let it go. They're out here, Lucas. I know it. They wouldn't just leave us. His voice cracked, betraying the raw pain he'd carried for over a decade. Lucas looked at him, his expression unreadable. The bayou seemed to close in around them, the air thick with humidity and unspoken grief. Ethan's search had changed him, dulled the spark of the kid who used to race boats with Lucas and laugh until his sides hurt. Now, he was a man driven by a single purpose, and Lucas wasn't sure how much longer he could watch it consume him. I get it, Lucas said finally, trying to bridge the gap. Something about this whole thing's never sat right. But maybe you're chasing shadows, Ethan. Maybe it's time to live for yourself. Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the water. I can't live for myself until I know what happened. They deserve that. We deserve that. The words hung heavy, and Lucas didn't push further. The echo sounder beeped steadily, scanning the bayou's depths as the boat moved deeper into the swamp. Let's keep going, Ethan said, his voice resolute. This is it, Lucas. This is the area they missed. No one's looked out here. Lucas raised an eyebrow, glancing at the tangled mangroves and dark water. You sure? This place is a maze. No cell service, no clear paths. We could be stuck out here all night. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. I know it sounds crazy, but they didn't just vanish. Something's out here. I can feel it. Lucas sighed, knowing Ethan's determination was unshakable. Allericht, Mann. Let's do it. The boat pushed deeper into the bayou, the channels narrowing as the cypress trees loomed closer. The sun climbed higher, its light filtering through the moss in dappled patches, but the heat was relentless, pressing down like a living thing. Hours passed, the landscape unchanging. Endless water, reeds, and the occasional flash of an egret's wings. Lucas's unease grew as the light began to fade, the bayou taking on a ghostly glow. We're pushing it, Ethan, he said, his voice tight. We need to head back before it's too dark. These waters are dangerous at night. Gators, currents, you name it. Ethan barely heard him, his mind lost in memories of Sarah teaching him to navigate the bayou, of Emma's laughter echoing across the water. He'd been here so many times, but this time felt different, like the swamp was holding its breath. Then, the echo sounder let out a sharp ping, jolting him back to the present. Ethan leaned forward, his heart racing as he studied the screen. A large, metallic shape appeared, half buried in the muddy bottom. Lucas, look, he whispered, pointing at the screen. Lucas squinted, then followed Ethan's gaze to the water ahead. Through the reeds, a glint of metal caught the fading light, partially obscured by moss and tangled roots. What the hell is that? Lucas muttered, his voice laced with unease. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He didn't need to see it clearly to know. The shape was unmistakable, a truck, overturned and sinking into the bayou's embrace. His mother's Chevy Tahoe, its faded mountain sticker barely visible beneath the algae and grime. That's Mom's truck? Ethan breathed, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and dread. He guided the boat closer, the water parting around them as the truth loomed larger with every second. Ethan's heart thundered as he eased the boat closer to the submerged truck, the dark water of Bayou Black lapping against the hull with a slow, mournful rhythm. The Chevy Tahoe, half sunk in the muddy channel, was a ghost from his past, its frame cloaked in algae and tangled reeds. The mountain sticker on its side, faded but unmistakable, sent a jolt through him, a symbol of his mother Sarah's love for the wild places she'd shared with him and Emma. The bayou seemed to hold its breath, the cicadas falling silent, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Lucas, gripping the echo sounder at the bow, stared at the wreckage, his face pale in the dimming light. This is insane, Ethan, he said, his voice tight with disbelief. How's this thing been sitting here for 11 years, and no one found it? Fishermen, trappers, they're all over these waters. Ethan didn't answer right away, his eyes locked on the truck as he tied the boat to a gnarled cypress root. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, the humidity pressing against his skin like a damp shroud. His mind churned with memories, Sarah teaching him to read the bayou's currents, Emma skipping stones across the water, her laughter echoing through the mangroves. For 11 years, he'd carried the pain of their absence, a wound that festered with every dead-end search. The police had scoured these channels, their boats cutting through the same waters he now navigated, but they'd found nothing. Now, this truck, hidden in a remote stretch of Bayou Black, was proof that the truth had been deliberately buried. It wasn't just lost, Ethan said finally, his voice low and rough. Someone hit it here. This wasn't an accident. Lucas frowned, glancing at the tangled vegetation around them. Hit it? In the middle of the bayou? That's a hell of a lot of effort, Ethan. Who'd go through that trouble? Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands slick with sweat as he stepped onto the muddy bank, his boots sinking into the soft earth. Someone who didn't want it found, he said, his gaze never leaving the truck. The bayou's eerie stillness seemed to amplify his words, the distant croak of a bullfrog the only response. Lucas followed, his reluctance clear as he swatted at a cloud of mosquitoes. "We need to call the cops, man," he said, pulling out his phone and cursing at the lack of signal. "This is way beyond us. You're messing with something serious here." Ethan shook his head, his focus unwavering. "Not yet, Lucas. I need to see it first. I need to know." He approached the truck, his pulse racing as he brushed away the slimy algae coating the driver's side door. The mountain sticker, its colors dulled by years underwater, felt like a punch to the chest. He could still see Sarah peeling it from its backing, sticking on the truck with a proud smile, promising to take him and Emma to every wild place it represented. Now, it marked the spot where they'd vanished. He forced the door open, the hinges groaning as if protesting the intrusion. The cab was a waterlogged ruin, the seats coated in mud, the dashboard warped by years in the bayou's embrace. There was no sign of Sarah or Emma, no bags, no trace of the camping gear they'd packed for their trip. It was as if the truck had been stripped of their presence, left to rot in the swamp's depths. Ethan's throat tightened, the emptiness of the cab mirroring the hole in his heart. "Ethan, this is creepy as hell," Lucas said, standing back in the shallow water. "We shouldn't be here alone. What if someone's watching?" Ethan wasn't listening. His hands searched under the seats, fingers brushing through silt and debris until they closed around something hard and rectangular. His breath caught as he pulled it free, a small, waterlogged case, its latches rusted but intact. It was Sarah's drone case, the one she'd used to capture the bayou's beauty on their family trips. "Lucas, over here," Ethan called, his voice urgent as he fumbled with the latches. Lucas waded closer, peering over his shoulder as Ethan opened the case. Inside was the drone, its frame battered but recognizable, and tucked beside it was a micro SD card, slightly warped but miraculously whole. Ethan held the card up to the fading light, his hands trembling. "This could have footage," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something that tells us what happened." Lucas nodded, his expression grim. "If it still works. But we need to get out of here, Ethan. This place is giving me the creeps, and it's getting dark." Ethan clutched the case, his mind racing. The bayou's shadows seemed to deepen, the mangroves closing in like silent sentinels. He knew Lucas was right. They were pushing their luck, alone in a place where the water could hide anything. But he couldn't leave, not when he was this close to answers. They returned to the boat, the drone case cradled in Ethan's lap as they navigated back through the winding channels. The bayou's oppressive silence pressed harder, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional splash of something moving in the water. Ethan's thoughts were a tangle of hope and dread. What would the footage show? A clue to where Sarah and Emma had gone? Or proof of something worse? As soon as they reached a spot with cell service, Ethan dialed Detective Claire Morgan, the officer who'd worked their case all those years ago. Her voice crackled through the phone, sharp but laced with the weariness of someone who'd seen too many cases go cold. "Ethan, what's going on?" "We found the truck," Ethan said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "It's in a channel west of Bayou Black. I sent you the coordinates. It's Mom's, her mountain stickers on it. And we found a drone case with a micro SD card. There might be footage." There was a long pause, the sound of papers rustling on the other end. "Stay where you are," Claire said, her tone shifting to urgency. "Don't touch anything else." We're on our way. The wait was agonizing, the bayou's humidity clinging to Ethan's skin as he and Lucas sat in the boat, the drone case between them. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the water, and the air grew thick with the chirping of frogs and the buzz of insects. Ethan's mind replayed every moment of the past 11 years, the sleepless nights, the arguments with his father, the endless trips into the swamp that had left him empty-handed. This was different. This was real. The truck, the drone, they were pieces of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve since he was 18. Finally, Claire and her team arrived, their boats cutting through the water, kicking up waves that rocked the mangroves. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, securing the area around the truck with floodlights that cast an eerie glow over the scene. Ethan watched from the bank, feeling like an outsider in his own story. Claire approached, her face grim as she studied the truck. "Ethan, this truck wasn't here during the initial searches," she said, her voice low. "The rust, the way it's settled, it's been here maybe 7 or 8 years, not 11. Ethan's stomach churned. "What do you mean? We searched these channels back then. I was there." Claire shook her head, her eyes scanning the wreckage. "Someone moved it here after the searches stopped. This was deliberate, Ethan. Someone didn't want it found." The words hit like a physical blow, confirming Ethan's worst fears. The truck hadn't been lost. It had been hidden, sunk in the bayou to keep its secrets buried. His mind raced with questions. Who would do this? And what had happened to Sarah and Emma? Before he could press Claire further, an officer called out, "Detective, you need to see this." They hurried to the truck, where a technician was examining the drone case. Claire took the micro SD card and handed it to another officer, who plugged it into a laptop set up on a nearby boat. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of Sarah and Emma at their campsite by the water's edge. Sarah was laughing, pointing the drone's camera at Emma as she tossed pebbles into the bayou, her stuffed alligator tucked under her arm. The footage was painfully familiar, a snapshot of a life Ethan had lost. But the final video was different. It showed the drone flying over a remote stretch of the bayou, far from their planned route, capturing a hidden dock piled with crates, wooden boxes marked with cryptic symbols, unmistakably weapons caches. The area was marked as restricted, a no-go zone for civilians, known to locals as a place to avoid. The footage cut off abruptly, the screen going black. Ethan's heart pounded. "They weren't supposed to be there," he said, his voice shaking. "That's not where they were camping." Claire's eyes narrowed as she studied the screen. "Those crates, they're consistent with weapons smuggling. We've been tracking a ring operating in the bayou, moving illegal arms through these channels. Your mother must have seen something she wasn't supposed to." Ethan's blood ran cold. Sarah, with her keen eye and relentless curiosity, had always been observant, always noticing details others missed. If she'd stumbled onto a smuggling operation, she wouldn't have let it go. And Emma, just a child, had been caught in the crossfire. The realization settled over Ethan like the bayou's fog. They hadn't gotten lost. They'd been taken, likely by the very people running guns through these waters. Ethan's heart pounded like a drum against the oppressive silence of Bayou Black, the drone's micro SD card a burning weight in his pocket as he and Lucas steered their boat back toward civilization. The bayou's dark waters reflected the fading light, the air thick with the scent of rotting vegetation and the faint, acrid tang of gunpowder from the footage they'd uncovered. The discovery of his mother's truck, half sunk in a muddy channel, and the drone footage revealing a hidden dock piled with weapons crates had shattered the fragile hope Ethan had clung to for 11 years. Sarah and Emma hadn't gotten lost in the bayou's labyrinth. They'd been taken, likely by the smugglers running illegal arms through these forgotten waterways. The realization fueled a fire in his chest, a mix of rage and dread that drowned out the bayou's eerie chorus of frogs and cicadas. Lucas sat at the bow, his face taut as he scanned the narrowing channels, the mangroves twisting like skeletal fingers in the gathering dusk. "Ethan, we need to let Claire handle this," he said, his voice low but urgent, his cap casting shadows across his worried eyes. "That footage, it's proof of something big. These guys aren't just moving fishing gear. Ethan's grip tightened on the throttle, his knuckles white against the worn metal. I can't wait, Lucas. They're out there. I've waited too long already. Lucas shook his head, his voice rising slightly. You're gonna get us killed, man. This is a weapons smuggling ring. You saw those crates? Military-grade stuff? This isn't a game. Ethan didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun bled into the bayou, painting the water in hues of crimson and gold. He'd called Detective Claire Morgan, sending her the drone footage and the truck's coordinates, but waiting for her team felt like abandoning Sarah and Emma all over again. Every moment he delayed was another moment they suffered in whatever nightmare had claimed them. Claire had confirmed the crates were tied to a smuggling operation her team had been tracking, a network that used the bayou's maze to move illegal arms undetected, from handguns to assault rifles, supplying a shadowy market that thrived in the swamp's isolation. Sarah, with her sharp mind and love for documenting the bayou's beauty, must have stumbled onto their operation. And Emma, just 5 years old, had been caught in the crossfire. Ethan's truck rumbled down a narrow, overgrown road, the only path to the coordinates Claire had traced from the drone footage, a remote compound hidden deep in the bayou's heart. The landscape was a tangle of palmetto and cypress, their roots plunging into the dark water like veins. The air buzzed with insects, the occasional splash of an alligator or gar breaking the surface, a reminder of the bayou's dangers. The compound loomed ahead, a cluster of rusted sheds and a weathered dock shrouded by mangroves, their branches swaying in the humid breeze. Ethan's pulse quickened, his hand resting on the pistol at his side. He'd never wanted to carry a gun, its weight foreign and uncomfortable, but the thought of what these smugglers had done to his family made his blood boil. He parked the truck a safe distance away, the engine's hum fading into the swamp's heavy silence. Ethan, this is a terrible idea, Lucas whispered, his eyes darting to the shadows beyond the dock. We should wait for Claire. These guys are armed to the teeth. But Ethan was already moving, his boots crunching on the gravelly path toward the compound. I can't wait, Lucas. They're in there. I know it. The air grew denser, the scent of oil and metal mixing with the bayou's damp decay. The swamp seemed to watch, its silence a warning Ethan ignored. He'd spent 11 years chasing ghosts. Now, he was steps away from the truth, and nothing could stop him. As he neared the entrance, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a worn leather jacket, his face weathered by years in the swamp's harsh embrace. His name was Victor, and the cold glint in his eyes marked him as a predator, someone who thrived on the power he held over the bayou's hidden routes. Well, Victor said, his voice a low rasp, like the scrape of a boat's hull on gravel. Took you long enough, Caldwell. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. The man knew his name, a fact that sent a chill through him despite the bayou's heat. Who are you? Ethan demanded, his hand hovering near the pistol, sweat beading on his brow. Victor's smile widened, a cruel edge to it, his eyes glinting like the scales of a gator in the moonlight. Name's Victor, and I've been expecting you. You've been making noise, digging into things you shouldn't. Just like your mother. Ethan's stomach twisted, his vision narrowing as Victor's words sank in. The bayou's oppressive humidity seemed to tighten around him, the distant croak of frogs amplifying the surreal horror. You knew her? What did you do to them? He asked, his voice trembling with rage and desperation. Victor chuckled, stepping closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. Sarah was too smart for her own good. Saw our operation, started asking questions, filming with that damn drone. She thought she could expose us, thought she could play hero. And your sister, little Emma? She was just collateral. Ethan's blood ran cold, his mind reeling. Where are they? He demanded, his voice rising, his hand twitching toward the pistol. Victor's eyes flicked to the weapon, but he didn't flinch, his confidence unnerving. They didn't die, Caldwell. They were too valuable for that. We took them, used them. Sarah's knowledge of these channels. She knew the bayou better than most of our runners. She helped us move guns, navigate the routes. And Emma, we raised her, shaped her. She's one of us now. The words hit Ethan like a tidal wave, each one threatening to drown him in grief and disbelief. His mother and sister, alive but trapped in this criminal underworld? He pictured Sarah's warm smile, her hands guiding his as they cast fishing lines into the bayou, and Emma's giggles as she chased fireflies along the water's edge. The idea that they'd been forced into smuggling weapons, their spirits broken by men like Victor, was unbearable. "You're lying," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking, though a part of him feared it was true. The bayou's silence mocked him, its dark waters holding secrets he wasn't sure he could face. Victor stepped closer, his presence as oppressive as the swamp's humidity. "You think they're still the same people you knew? Sarah's a ghost of herself, worn down by years of doing what she had to survive. And Emma, she doesn't even remember the kid she was. They're part of this life, Caldwell. You can't undo what's been done." Ethan's vision blurred with tears, his chest tight with a fury he could barely contain. "Where are they?" he shouted, his hand gripping the pistol. Victor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of amusement in them. "They're here, in the compound. You want to see them? Go ahead, but don't expect a happy reunion. They're not yours anymore." The words were a knife to Ethan's heart, twisting with every syllable. He shoved past Victor, his mind a storm of determination and fear, his boots sinking into the muddy path as he stormed toward the compound's entrance. The bayou seemed to close in, the mangroves whispering warnings in the rustle of their leaves. Lucas grabbed his arm, his voice urgent. "Ethan, this is a trap. You're walking into a snake pit." But Ethan shook him off, his focus razor-sharp. "I don't care, Lucas. I have to find them." He'd spent over a decade imagining this moment, picturing Sarah and Emma lost but alive, waiting for him to bring them home. Now, the truth was within reach, and it was darker than he'd ever feared. The compound was a maze of rusted sheds and damp wooden walkways, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and the faint metallic tang of blood. Dim lights flickered above, casting shadows that danced like specters across the weathered dock. Ethan moved quickly, his heart pounding as he kicked open a shed door, revealing crates stacked high. Military-grade rifles, ammunition, the tools of the smuggler's trade. The sight made his stomach churn. This was the world his mother and sister had been forced into, a world of violence and secrecy hidden in the bayou's depths. He searched frantically, each empty room a fresh wound, his mind racing with images of Sarah navigating these channels under duress, of Emma growing up in this nightmare. Lucas trailed behind, his voice a tense whisper. "Ethan, slow down. We're outnumbered here." But Ethan's focus was unyielding, his senses heightened by the bayou's eerie sounds, the lap of water against the dock, the distant cry of an egret. He pushed deeper into the compound, his breath shallow, his hand gripping the pistol. Suddenly, shadows moved in the corners, and before he could react, men emerged from the darkness, hardened figures with eyes like the bayou's predators. They were on him in seconds, fists and boots striking with brutal precision. Pain seared through Ethan's body, each blow driving the air from his lungs. Blood splattered on the muddy ground, the taste of it sharp in his mouth. He tried to fight back, swinging wildly, but the numbers were overwhelming, their attacks relentless. Through the haze of pain, he thought of Sarah and Emma, their faces fueling his resolve. He couldn't give up. Not now, not when he was so close. Just as his vision began to blur, the wail of sirens pierced the bayou's stillness, cutting through the fog like a beacon. Flashing lights illuminated the mangroves, their red and blue glow reflecting off the dark water. Detective Claire Morgan's team stormed the compound, their boats roaring through the channels, officers shouting commands that echoed over the swamp. The smugglers scattered, some diving into the water, others firing shots that rang out like thunder. But Claire's team was relentless, their weapons drawn as they swept through the sheds, cuffing the men who'd ruled this hidden empire. Ethan collapsed, his body screaming with pain, but a flicker of relief broke through the haze. The smugglers were being stopped. His family might finally be free. Medics rushed to Ethan, helping him to his feet as he fought to stay conscious, his vision swimming. Blood dripped from a cut above his eye, but he pushed through the pain, his gaze searching the chaos. Then he saw them, Sarah and Emma, being led from a shed by Claire's officers. His mother's face was gaunt, her once vibrant eyes hollow, her skin pale as the Spanish moss overhead. Emma, now a teenager, stood hunched, her expression vacant, as if the bayou had drained the light from her soul. Ethan's legs buckled, but he staggered forward, tears stinging his eyes as he took in the sight of them. They were alive, but the years in the smuggler's grip had left them shadows of the people he'd known. "Mom, Emma," Ethan choked out, his voice raw with emotion. "I'm here. I'm so sorry." Emma's gaze met his, hesitant, her eyes searching his face as if unsure whether he was real or another cruel trick of the swamp. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers trembling, and Ethan pulled her into a tight embrace, her frail frame shaking against him. Sarah stood nearby, her hand shaking as she reached for him, her voice a faint whisper. "Ethan," the word carried the weight of a decade lost, of pain endured in the bayou shadows. The reunion was a storm of emotions, relief at finding them, grief for what they'd suffered, and a burning rage at the men who'd stolen their lives. The bayou's dark waters seemed to watch, their secrets finally exposed under the glare of the police lights. Ethan held Emma tightly, her frail frame trembling against him as the chaos of the police raid swirled around the smuggling compound. The bayou's humid air clung to his skin, heavy with the scent of mud, gunpowder, and the metallic tang of his own blood from the beating he'd endured. Sarah stood just steps away, her gaunt face illuminated by the flashing lights of Detective Claire Morgan's boats, her hollow eyes searching Ethan's, as if trying to bridge the 11 years that had separated them. The mangroves loomed like silent witnesses, their roots twisting into the dark water, a reminder of the bayou's role in hiding the horrors his mother and sister had faced. Claire's team moved with precision, cuffing the remaining smugglers and securing crates of illegal weapons, rifles, handguns, and ammunition that had fueled a shadowy empire in the swamp's depths. The sirens wailed, their sound cutting through the fog, a stark contrast to the bayou's usual eerie stillness. Ethan's body ached, each bruise and cut a testament to the fight he'd waged to reach this moment. But the pain was nothing compared to the overwhelming relief of seeing Sarah and Emma alive. Yet, that relief was tempered by the sight of them. Sarah, once vibrant and full of life, now a shadow of herself, her skin pale and her movements hesitant. Emma, no longer the bright-eyed 5-year-old who'd clutched her stuffed alligator, but a teenager with a vacant stare, as if the bayou had drained her spirit. The smugglers had used them, forced Sarah to navigate the swamp's hidden channels for their weapons shipments, exploiting her knowledge of the bayou's currents and tides. Emma, too young to resist, had been molded into compliance, her childhood stolen by men who saw her as a tool. The thought of their suffering made Ethan's chest tighten, his tears mixing with the sweat and blood on his face. "Mom, Emma," he whispered, his voice raw and cracking. "I never stopped looking. I'm so sorry it took so long." Emma's grip tightened slightly, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she didn't speak, her silence a wound as deep as any Ethan had endured. Sarah stepped closer, her trembling hand brushing his arm, her touch so light it felt like a ghost's. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice barely audible, as if speaking required every ounce of strength she had left. The reunion was a collision of joy and heartbreak, a moment Ethan had dreamed of for over a decade, now tainted by the reality of what they'd endured. They were together, but the bayou's shadows clung to them, a reminder that freedom was only the beginning of their healing. Claire approached, her face a mix of relief and concern as she surveyed the scene. "Ethan, we're taking them to the hospital," she said, her voice steady but softened by empathy. "You need to get checked out too. You're in rough shape." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving Sarah and Emma as medics guided them toward an ambulance boat docked at the compound's edge. The bayou's dark waters lapped against the hull, their surface reflecting the red and blue lights like a fractured mirror. As the boat carried them away, Ethan's mind raced with questions. How had his mother and sister survived such horrors? What had they been forced to do to stay alive? And could they ever reclaim the lives the Bayou had stolen? At the hospital in Homa, Ethan sat by Sarah and Emma's bedsides, the sterile white walls and beeping monitors a jarring contrast to the Bayou's wild darkness. Sarah's condition was stable but dire. Malnutrition had weakened her. Old injuries from her time with the smugglers had left scars both physical and mental, and her eyes held a haunted look that spoke of years under their control. Emma was quieter, her gaze fixed on the ceiling, as if trapped in a world Ethan couldn't reach. Doctors explained that their recovery would be a long, arduous process, requiring therapy to address the trauma of being trafficked and exploited. Sarah had been coerced into guiding the smugglers' boats, her knowledge of the Bayou's channels making her invaluable, while Emma had been raised in the compound, taught to obey and forget the family she'd lost. The details were a knife to Ethan's heart, each one deepening his guilt for not finding them sooner. Claire visited the next day, her notepad filled with updates on the investigation. "Your mother's drone footage was the break we needed," she said, her voice firm but tinged with admiration. Sarah must have known she was onto something dangerous. That's why they took her and Emma, to silence her and use her skills. "We've dismantled the ring, arrested their leaders, and seized enough weapons to arm a small militia. This is big, Ethan." Ethan clenched his fists, the anger still simmering beneath his exhaustion. Why didn't anyone find them sooner? Why did not? His voice broke, the weight of 11 years of searching crashing down. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression softening. "You did find them, Ethan. You never gave up. That's what brought them home." The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, police interviews, and therapy sessions. Ethan moved Sarah and Emma to a quiet town outside the Bayou, a place with rolling fields and clear skies, far from the swamp's oppressive grip.